There is a woman you have known, or at least observed from a distance, perhaps across a kitchen table, perhaps through a window, perhaps only in memory. She did not appear to be doing anything extraordinary. She was not meditating at dawn or reciting formulas before sleep. She worked, sometimes without rest, sometimes without thanks. And yet, something about the quality of her engagement with the world was fundamentally different from the quality you recognize in the people around you who strain and exhaust themselves and still find the supply uncertain. She moved through her days with a kind of gravity that was not heaviness. She gave without measuring what she gave. She waited without the particular tightening that anxiety produces in those who are not certain the thing they wait for will actually arrive. And somehow, steadily, without the dramatic gestures of ambition or the theater of sacrifice, what she needed came. Wallace Wattles spent the better part of a decade attempting to render the precise mechanics of that inner state into the language of scientific law. What he produced was not a philosophy of comfort. It was a system of cause and effect so exacting that he called it a science. The law at the center of that system, the one this woman embodied without ever reading a word of it, is the law of receiving. The English language has done considerable damage to our understanding of this law, and the damage begins with a single, quiet act of imprecision. We use the words getting and receiving as though they are synonyms, two ways of describing the same transaction. Wattles does not use them this way. The distinction he draws between the two is not grammatical. It is ontological. It describes two entirely different relationships between the human mind and the source of all supply. Getting is a competitive act. It presupposes a finite world in which resources are distributed across a field of contestants, and in which your portion is secured only by moving faster, pushing harder, or outmaneuvering those who want the same thing you want. The logic of getting is the logic of scarcity. It begins with the assumption that there is not enough, that others stand between you and what you need, and that the primary instrument of acquisition is force, the force of will, of effort, of determination. This is not a metaphysical error only. It is a strategic one, because the inner architecture of getting produces an inner state that, in Wattles' system, actively prevents the arrival of what is sought. Receiving operates from a different premise altogether. It is not the relaxation of effort. It is not the abandonment of action. A woman who receives does not sit in silence waiting for supply to materialize around her. She acts often with greater sustained energy than the person who strains and grasps. But the inner state from which her action proceeds is fundamentally different in its architecture. It is rooted not in the premise of scarcity, but in the premise of sufficiency. It does not originate in the feeling that supply is uncertain and must be secured before someone else takes it. It originates in the recognition that supply is infinite, that it is already in motion toward her, and that her task is not to chase it, but to maintain the inner condition that allows it to arrive. This is the distinction Wattles is drawing when he separates the competitive plane from the creative plane, two different inner architectures, two different relationships with the formless substance from which all material forms are drawn. Only one of them constitutes receiving. Consider what it means to say that receiving is a creative act. Wattles grounds this claim in his description of the formless substance, the original thinking stuff from which, as he writes in chapter 4, all things are made. This substance, he argues, is not inert. It thinks. It responds. It moves in the direction of the mental impressions made upon it. And the critical insight, the one that changes the entire architecture of the system, is that this substance cannot be compelled by need. It does not respond to desperation, to urgency, or to the emotional signature of one who lacks. It responds to the dominant mental impression being held. It takes the form of the thought that is consistently and clearly sustained within it. This means that the inner state from which you approach the formless is not incidental to the process. It is the process. Receiving is the act of bringing your inner state into the precise alignment with the nature of the formless, an alignment that Wattles identifies by a single word, which we will examine in precise detail. Getting is the act of trying to bypass that alignment through force, and the law operates with absolute indifference to how much force is applied. What this script will do is not offer you an interpretation of Wattles. There are many interpretations. What it will do is go directly into the language of the source text, Chapter 7 of The Science of Getting Rich. The chapter Wattles titles simply Gratitude, and extract the precise mechanical description of what the receiving state actually is, what it requires, and how it fails when disturbed. We will then move through two primary pillars of the law. First, the precise mechanics by which the act of pursuit from the wrong inner state closes the very channel it is trying to open. And second, the concrete practical discipline by which the receiving state is cultivated and maintained. These are not abstractions. Wattles does not deal in abstractions. He deals in laws, and laws have specific conditions of operation. We will identify those conditions with the exactness they require. If you watch this until the end, you will have not a philosophy, but a diagnostic instrument, a way of examining your own inner state at any moment of the day and determining with precision whether you are in the receiving condition or whether the channel is closed. That is what Wattles intended his reader to possess. That is what the woman you are thinking of already possessed without knowing the name for it. You will notice as we proceed that the channel we reference is not a metaphor for inspiration or general receptivity. It is Wattles's specific term for the conduit between the prepared human mind and the formless substance from which all supply proceeds. He describes it in Chapter 7 as being maintained or severed by a single inner act. And the consequences of severing it, he writes, are immediate and operationally precise. We will not rush past this. We will remain with it long enough for the mechanism to become visible. If something in this opening has already disturbed a belief you hold about how effort and supply are related, that disturbance is productive. It means the diagnostic is already working. Hold it. The explanation is forthcoming. Before we enter the law itself, there is one more thing to establish: the nature of the authority we are drawing from. Wallace Wattles published The Science of Getting Rich in 1910 after decades of personal poverty and sustained philosophical study. The system he describes was not developed in comfort. It was developed through the experience of its failure and eventual operation. He tested it against the conditions of his own life with the rigor of someone for whom the stakes were not theoretical. What he produced is a text of unusual precision, one that refuses the language of inspiration and insists on the language of law. We will honor that insistence throughout this examination. We will not soften his claims. We will not make them more palatable. We will follow them to where they lead. Chapter 7 of The Science of Getting Rich is titled with characteristic economy, gratitude. It is the shortest substantial chapter in the book. It is also, in terms of its structural function within Wattles' system, the most load-bearing. Every other chapter describes what the practitioner must think or do. Chapter 7 describes the inner condition from which all other thought and action must proceed. Without this chapter, the rest of the system has no foundation to stand upon. With it, the entire architecture locks into coherence. The sentence that anchors it, the one that contains, in Wattles' own formulation, the complete law of receiving, reads as follows: "The grateful mind is constantly fixed upon the best. Therefore, it tends to become the best. It takes the form or character of the best and will receive the best." Read it slowly enough that the three movements within it become distinct. Fixed upon the best, tends to become the best, will receive the best. This is not a sequence of aspirations. It is a sequence of causes and effects, each one following from the last, with the inevitability of a natural law. The phrase, "fixed upon the best," is the precise technical description of what Wattles means by the receiving state. The word "fixed" is not casual. It does not mean occasional contemplation of pleasant outcomes or the habit of optimistic thinking about the future. It means a sustained, deliberate, uninterrupted mental orientation toward the highest existing good. Fixed in the sense that a compass is fixed toward its pole, not because it strains in that direction, but because the nature of the instrument produces that orientation as its natural resting state. The grateful mind does not occasionally visit the best. The grateful mind is constitutively, structurally, continuously oriented toward it. This is what makes gratitude in Wattles' system not a spiritual practice, but an engineering specification. It describes the precise inner architecture that places the mind in harmony with the formless substance. Why does fixation upon the best produce the tendency to become the best? Wattles answers this question in language that draws directly from his foundational principle. We are thinking substance, and thinking substance always takes the form of that which it thinks about. The human mind is not a passive observer of reality. It is a creative center, made from the same original thinking stuff as the universe itself, and governed by the same law, the law that form follows thought. When you fix your mind consistently upon the best, you do not merely remind yourself that good things exist. You actively impress the image of the best upon the formless substance within and around you, and that substance which thinks and responds begins its movement toward producing the form of what is being impressed upon it. This is the mechanism. It is not mystical. It is, in Wattles' framing, as mechanical as the law of action and reaction. The phrase, "will receive the best," is the culminating step, but it is important to understand what makes it a consequence rather than an aspiration. In the ordinary grammar of wishful thinking, one might read this sentence as a promise. If you are grateful, good things will come. Wattles is not making a promise. He is stating a law. The movement of the formless toward those who are fixed upon the best is not a reward. It is an effect. The grateful mind that is continuously fixed upon the best has already, by the nature of its fixation, established the precise vibratory correspondence with the formless that causes movement. Receiving is not what happens after gratitude. Receiving is what gratitude already is when it is held with sufficient clarity, consistency, and depth of conviction. The moment of reception is not a future event. It is the present condition of a mind that is genuinely, structurally grateful. This distinction between gratitude as a means to an end and gratitude as the end state itself is where most practitioners of Wattles' system fail, and it is worth dwelling on at length. The common approach is instrumental. Cultivate gratitude so that good things arrive. This approach positions gratitude as a tool and good things as the objective. But this sequencing misunderstands the law. In Wattles' formulation, gratitude is not the door through which supply enters. Gratitude is the condition of being the kind of mind that the formless substance recognizes as aligned with its own nature. The formless, which is itself an intelligence perpetually moving toward more life, more expression, more abundance, can only work through a mind that shares its inner orientation. A mind fixed upon the best is a mind whose fundamental posture corresponds to the posture of formless substance itself, creative, expansive, uncontracted. This correspondence is the channel. Gratitude creates it not as an act of worship, but as an act of alignment. What happens then when the grateful mind is said to draw nigh unto God? Wattles quotes this phrase in chapter 7, and he immediately translates it. That is a statement of psychological truth. He is not speaking of devotional proximity. He is speaking of the measurable reduction of interior distance between the human thinking center and the formless intelligence from which supply proceeds. The more completely a mind is fixed upon the best, the more fully it is saturated with the recognition of existing good, the more completely it inhabits the same inner orientation as the creative principle of the universe. And proximity to that principle, in Wattles' science, is not a spiritual achievement. It is a practical one. The closer the mind is to the source of supply, he writes, the more wealth we shall receive. The law is a law of proximity. Gratitude is the act of reducing the distance. This is the receiving state, not a feeling, not an emotion, but a structural condition of the mind. The law of gratitude, as Wattles names it explicitly in chapter 7, is grounded in a principle that he considers prior to and independent of any spiritual interpretation. The principle that action and reaction are always equal and in opposite directions. He writes, "The grateful outreaching of your mind in thankful praise to the Supreme is a liberation or expenditure of force. It cannot fail to reach that to which it is addressed, and the reaction is an instantaneous movement toward you." Notice the precision of this language. The outreaching of the grateful mind is not an expression of feeling, it is a liberation of force, an actual expenditure of mental energy in the direction of the formless. And the reaction, which Wattles describes as instantaneous, is a movement of the formless in the equal and opposite direction, toward you. The law of gratitude is, in this reading, an application of Newton's third law to the metaphysical domain. Force applied to the formless produces an equal force returned. The greater the constancy and depth of the grateful outreaching, the the greater and more continuous the movement of supply toward the grateful mind. The word constant appears repeatedly in Wattles' description of the receiving state, and its appearance is not accidental. The constancy of gratitude is not a virtue he is recommending. It is a technical requirement. A mind that is grateful in the morning and resentful by midday has not established a continuous channel. It has established an intermittent one that opens and closes with the oscillations of mood, and through which supply can move only fitfully, if at all. The formless does not respond to momentary impulses. It responds to dominant impressions, the sustained, habitual, consistent tone of the mind. This is why Wattles writes that gratitude must be cultivated as a continuous orientation, not as a practice performed once a day. The receiving state is a state, not an act. It must be the background frequency from which all other thought, feeling, and action proceeds. Consider what this means for the structure of a day. The receiving state, as Wattles prescribes it, is not achieved through periodic exercises inserted between activities of a different character. It is maintained as the foundational condition of consciousness, the ground tone against which all other mental activity is conducted. When a difficulty arises, the receiving mind does not abandon its ground. It meets the difficulty from within the condition of sufficiency rather than contracting into the condition of scarcity. When results do not match expectation, the receiving mind does not interpret the gap as evidence of failure. It sustains its orientation toward the best with the same certainty that a physicist sustains belief in a law even when a single experiment appears to contradict it, because the law is known to be operative even when the conditions of a particular experiment are imperfect. This is what Wattles means by faith born of gratitude. It is not credulity. It is the operational certainty that proceeds from a mind that knows how the law works and has committed to maintaining the conditions of its operation. The damage done by intermittent gratitude, the kind that rises in the morning and dissolves under the friction of the day, is not merely the loss of the channel for those moments when gratitude is absent. Wattles identifies a more serious consequence. He writes, "The moment you permit your mind to dwell with dissatisfaction upon things as they are, you begin to lose ground. You fix attention upon the common, the ordinary, the poor, and the squalid and mean, and your mind takes the form of these things. Then you will transmit these forms or mental images to the formless, and the common, the poor, the squalid, and mean will come to you." This is not a warning about pessimism as a failure of character. It is a precise mechanical statement about what happens when the law is reversed. The same principle that makes gratitude creative makes dissatisfaction equally creative, in the direction of its own object. To permit your mind to dwell upon lack is to impress the formless with the image of lack, and the formless which thinks and responds and takes the form of the thought impressed upon it responds accordingly. This is the law operating in reverse. It is not punishment. It is precision. The receiving state, understood in its full technical significance, is therefore an act of continuous creative dominion over the contents of the mind. Wattles acknowledges that this is among the most demanding forms of labor available to the human being. He writes in Chapter 4, "There is no labor from which most people shrink as they do from that of sustained and consecutive thought. It is the hardest work in the world. The discipline of maintaining gratitude, of refusing to permit the mind to rest upon dissatisfaction, of returning it again and again to fixed orientation toward the best, is not a passive discipline. It is an act of sustained mental force, but it is force applied in the right direction toward the maintenance of the condition that allows the law to operate. This is what separates the receiving state from both passivity and striving. It is neither. It is a form of mastery that is more demanding than effort because it requires the continuous governance of one's own inner architecture. There is one further dimension of Chapter 7 that demands careful examination, and it concerns the relationship between gratitude and faith. Wattles writes, "Faith is born of gratitude. The grateful mind continually expects good things, and expectation becomes faith." This sequence is precise and important. Faith in Wattles' system is not a matter of belief adopted as a stance. It is the natural product of a mind that has been so consistently fixed upon the best, so continuously oriented toward existing good, that the expectation of more good arriving has become its habitual state. The grateful mind does not hope that supply will continue. It expects it with the certainty of one who understands the law. And that expectation, sustained and clarified by continuous gratitude, is what Wattles calls faith. Not faith as a religious posture, but faith as the operative certainty that activates the creative method. Without it, he writes directly, you cannot get rich by the creative method. Faith is not the starting condition. It is the product of gratitude sustained long enough to become structural. This reveals something critical about the sequence of the system. Most practitioners attempt to begin with faith, to command themselves to believe, to generate certainty from nothing, to will themselves into a state of operative trust. This approach consistently fails because it reverses the order of cause and effect. Faith is not where you begin. Gratitude is where you begin. You begin by recognizing, with precision and deliberateness, the existing good that surrounds you, not imagined future good, existing good, the functioning of the body, the roof overhead, the small, reliable mercies of a day. From that recognition, held consistently and deepened progressively, gratitude becomes structural. And from structural gratitude, faith arises not as an act of will, but as an inevitable consequence, the way a certain temperature inevitably produces a certain change in the state of matter. This is the correct sequence of the law. Gratitude first, faith as the product, receiving as the state that results from both in combination. The final observation about Chapter 7 that must be made before we proceed is this. Wattles writes that without gratitude, you cannot long keep from dissatisfied thought regarding things as they are. This sentence, read carefully, contains a description of what is most dangerous about the absence of the receiving state. It is not merely that supply slows or stops. It is that the mind, unanchored by gratitude, will drift, inevitably, by the natural weight of unexamined experience, toward dissatisfaction. And dissatisfied thought is not a neutral state. It is, in Wattles' system, an actively creative state pointed in the wrong direction. A mind that is not actively held in orientation toward the best will not rest in a neutral position. It will, by default, contract toward the image of what it lacks. The receiving state is therefore not merely beneficial. It is, in the most precise sense of the word, necessary. There is no stable, neutral position between receiving and grasping. The law does not permit it. A mind that is not actively cultivating the receiving condition is, by default and by mechanical necessity, cultivating its opposite. We have established what the receiving state is in its positive form. We must now examine the logic that makes it not merely preferable, but operationally necessary. The argument that Wattles constructs across the first chapters of The Science of Getting Rich to demonstrate that the competitive mind is not merely less efficient than the creative mind, but is structurally incapable of accessing the source of all supply. This argument does not rest on ethical grounds. Wattles is explicit about this. He does not argue that competition is wrong. He argues that it does not work, that it fails by the logic of the system itself, and that this failure is not accidental, but structurally determined. Understanding this argument is what separates a practitioner of the receiving state from someone who merely finds it spiritually appealing. The former understands why it is the only method that functions. The latter is relying on inclination, and inclination under pressure does not hold. The architecture of the argument begins with the foundational principle that Wattles repeats throughout the text with deliberate insistence. There is one original formless substance from which all things are made, and this substance thinks and responds to thought. This is not, in Wattles's framing, a metaphor or a spiritual claim. It is the first principle of a system, and the entire edifice rests upon it. If the formless substance is real, if it is the actual material from which all visible forms proceed, then the primary instrument of acquisition is not physical effort, but mental impression. The dominant thought held in the mind is the primary determinant of what the formless moves toward producing. This means that the inner state from which action proceeds is not secondary to the action itself. It is the essential variable. Change the inner state, and you change the result, even if the outer action remains identical. This principle produces a conclusion that is, for most industrious people, profoundly uncomfortable. Effort applied from the wrong inner state is not merely insufficient, it is counterproductive. It is not that the competitive, striving, grasping approach fails to produce results altogether. Wattles acknowledges explicitly that men who operate on the competitive plane do sometimes accumulate wealth. But he makes two observations about such wealth that reveal its structural instability. The first, riches secured on the competitive plane are never satisfactory and permanent. They are yours today and another's tomorrow. The second, more devastating, those who have secured riches by purely competitive means have never been really rich. What is meant by this? That the inner condition of such people, continuously contracted around scarcity, continuously calculating relative advantage, continuously in the posture of defense, is the precise inner condition that the law of receiving identifies as the condition of closing the channel. They may hold wealth, but they cannot receive it. And wealth that cannot be received is, in the deepest sense, not possessed. The competitive mind operates from a premise that Wattles identifies as the central error of the system, the premise that the supply is limited. He writes, "Just as soon as you begin to think that all the money is being cornered and controlled by bankers and others, and that you must exert yourself to get laws passed to stop this process, and so on. In that moment, you drop into the competitive mind, and your power to cause creation is gone for the time being. The phrase, power to cause creation, is precise. The competitive mind does not merely fail to use its creative power, it actively suspends it, because the act of entering the competitive frame, the act of perceiving supply as finite and contested, is the act of impressing upon the formless the image of limitation. And the formless, which responds with perfect fidelity to the dominant impression, reflects that image back as the experience of limited supply. The belief creates the condition it fears. This is the structural trap of the competitive mind, and it is important to understand its circularity. The person who enters competition from a premise of scarcity finds repeatedly that supply is insufficient because their inner state is continuously impressing the image of insufficiency upon the formless. This experience appears to confirm that scarcity is real, which deepens the competitive posture, which deepens the impression of scarcity, which produces more of the experience. The loop is self-sealing. It does not break from within by trying harder, because the trying harder merely intensifies the signal of need and scarcity that the formless is already mirroring back. The only exit from the loop is the one Wattles describes, a fundamental shift of the mind from the competitive plane to the creative plane, not a shift of strategy, not a shift of technique, a shift of inner state, the replacement of the premise of scarcity with the premise of infinite supply, held with sufficient certainty and depth to impress itself upon the formless in place of the old image. Why is this shift so difficult to make and to sustain? Because the appearances of the visible world continuously argue for the competitive premise. There is, on the surface of experience, abundant evidence for scarcity. Prices rise, opportunities contract, others appear to secure what you are seeking. The visible supply of any particular resource appears finite and distributed across a population of competitors. The mind that takes its cues from appearances will, Wattles notes, always drift back toward the competitive frame. This is precisely why he writes in Chapter 4 that to think truth regardless of appearances is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other workman is called upon to perform. The maintenance of the receiving state, the creative premise, the orientation toward infinite invisible supply is not natural in the sense of being effortless. It is the most demanding form of inner work. But it is the only form of inner work that actually opens the channel. What does it mean specifically to fix one's attention on the invisible supply rather than the visible? Wattles is precise. Never look at the visible supply. Look always at the limitless riches in formless substance, and know that they are coming to you as fast as you can receive and use them. The phrase, "as fast as you can receive," is critical. It introduces the receiving state as a limiting factor, not the supply, which Wattles describes as boundless, but the capacity of the mind to maintain the inner condition of receiving. The supply is never the constraint. The state of the receiver is always the constraint. This inverts the entire framework within which most motivated people operate. They ask, how do I generate more supply? The correct question in Wattles' system is, how do I maintain the inner state that allows the supply that is already moving toward me to arrive. The distinction between the creative plane and the competitive plane is not a distinction between action and inaction. Wattles is emphatic on this point in chapter 11, where he addresses what he calls acting in the certain way. The person on the creative plane acts often with greater sustained precision than the person on the competitive plane, but the quality of their action is different. They act from a state of certainty rather than a state of anxiety. They perform each present action completely without being pulled out of it by worry about what comes next. They do not measure each action against an expected return before it is complete. They act, as Wattles puts it, in the full faith that the supply is coming. This is not optimism. It is the behavioral expression of a mind that has genuinely impressed the creative premise upon the formless and is now operating from within that impression rather than struggling toward it. The logic of this distinction produces an important secondary principle. The quality of presence brought to each individual action determines the quality of the impression made upon the formless by that action. An action performed from within the receiving state, fully present, governed by certainty, free from the contraction of anxiety, carries the vibratory signature of the creative plane. It impresses the formless with the image of a mind that is already in alignment with supply. An action performed from within the getting state, distracted by urgency, measuring itself as it proceeds, contracted around the fear of insufficiency, carries the opposite signature. The outer actions may be identical. The impressions they make upon the formless are not. This is why two people can perform the same work and produce radically different results, not because of differences in the work itself, but because of the difference in the inner state from which the work is undertaken. This logic has a particularly sharp application to the experience of exhaustion that so many industrious people recognize but cannot explain. They work. They work with sustained effort and genuine intelligence. They produce results that are real but consistently less than what the effort would seem to warrant. And they cannot identify what they are doing wrong, because on the level of outer action, they are doing very little wrong. What is wrong is the inner architecture of the effort itself. The fact that it proceeds from a state of urgency and insufficiency, and therefore continuously impresses upon the formless the image of a mind that does not yet have what it needs. The formless mirrors that image back as continued insufficiency. The person works harder in response, deepening the urgency, intensifying the impression of need, closing the channel further. This is not a moral failure, it is a mechanical one. The exit from it is not more effort. It is the recognition that the inner state from which the effort proceeds is the variable that must change. Wattles makes one further argument for the structural superiority of the receiving state that deserves careful examination. The argument from supply. He writes in chapter 3 with unusual force, "There is no limit to the supply of formless stuff or original substance. The universe is made out of it, but it was not all used in making the universe. The spaces in, through, and between the forms of the visible universe are permeated and filled with the original substance, with the formless stuff, with the raw material of all things." This is not a consolation, it is a structural claim. If the supply of formless substance is genuinely unlimited, And Wattles presents this not as a hope, but as a foundational fact of the system. Then competition for it is not merely unnecessary. It is, from the standpoint of the system, incoherent. You cannot compete for a supply that exceeds all possible demand by an infinite margin. The competitive premise is not merely ineffective, it is based on a false perception of reality. And a mind that operates from a false premise will produce results that confirm and reinforce that falseness. The receiving state is not merely more effective than the competitive one. It is the only stance that accurately corresponds to the actual nature of the supply. The receiving state, understood in this light, is not a spiritual ideal or a psychological improvement. It is the only rational response to the actual structure of reality, as Wattles describes it. A mind that grasps and strains toward a supply it believes to be finite is behaving, in the language of physics, like a closed system, one that can only redistribute a fixed quantity of energy. A mind in the receiving state is behaving like an open system, one that draws continuously from an external source that vastly exceeds its internal resources. The formless substance is that external source. Gratitude is the opening of the system, and the law of receiving is simply the description of what happens when the opening is maintained with sufficient clarity and consistency. The supply moves toward the open mind with the same inevitability that water moves toward an open vessel held beneath a flowing source. This is the unshakable logic. It does not depend on belief. It depends on the correct understanding of what the supply actually is and how it actually moves. The woman you thought of at the beginning of this examination, the one who received without grasping, who gave without calculating, was, in Wattles's precise technical language, an open system. She was not open because she was passive. She was open because she had, in her foundational inner state, already accepted the reality of sufficient supply. Her openness was not the absence of effort. It was the presence of a specific inner architecture, one of certainty, sufficiency, and continuous orientation toward the good, that placed her in exact correspondence with the creative principle of the formless. She may never have read a word of Wattles. She did not need to. The law operates whether or not its mechanism is understood. What Wattles gives us is the understanding, the precise description of what she was doing internally, and therefore the means by which what she did instinctively can be practiced deliberately. That is the purpose of a science, not to create the law, but to make its operation transparent enough to be reproduced. A mother who loves her child does not audit the love before she gives it. She does not calculate whether the previous allocation of tenderness produced sufficient return before she authorizes the next one. This is not, as sentiment would have it, merely a beautiful feature of maternal devotion. It is, in Wattles's precise technical language, the behavioral expression of a mind that has already resolved the question of supply. There is no rationing because there is no perceived scarcity. The love moves outward continuously, not because it is forced or performed, but because the inner state from which it proceeds is one of such thoroughgoing sufficiency that the outflow is natural, unimpeded, and self-sustaining. The mother who gives in this way is not depleting a resource. She is demonstrating in her very manner of giving that the resource is not subject to depletion. And this is precisely the inner precondition that Wattles identifies as necessary for receiving from the formless. Not the calculated giving of one who expects a return, but the natural, overflowing giving of one whose inner state has already resolved at its foundation the question of whether there is enough. Why does this quality of giving constitute a receiving posture? Because the inner state from which it proceeds, the state of recognized sufficiency, of supply accepted as present and real, is the same inner state that Wattles identifies as the receiving state. The woman who gives love from a foundation of genuine fullness is, in her very giving, impressing upon the formless the image of a mind that already has. Not a mind that hopes to have, or intends to have, or is working toward having. A mind that has. And the formless, which takes the form of the dominant impression held within it, responds to that image with the movement of more supply in the same direction. She receives because she is already, in the structure of her inner state, in the condition of one who receives. The giving is not the cause of the receiving. They are simultaneous expressions of the same inner condition. The open hand that gives and the open hand that receives are not two positions. They are one. Consider the contrast. The woman who gives love conditionally, who monitors the response before she continues giving, who measures whether her giving is being sufficiently appreciated, who contracts the flow of love when the return feels uncertain, is, in Wattles' terms, giving from a state of potential scarcity. Her giving is conditioned on evidence of return, which means her inner state carries the signature of a mind that is not certain the supply is sufficient unless it can observe its own replenishment. This conditional quality is not a failure of love in the ordinary sense. It is a different inner architecture. And because the formless responds to inner architecture rather than outer action, the conditional giver, no matter how much she actually gives, is communicating a different fundamental impression than the unconditional one. One communicates certainty of supply. The other communicates uncertainty. And the formless, which is an exact mirror of the mind's dominant impression, returns each to itself. The maternal model is particularly useful for understanding this law because it makes visible something that abstract philosophy tends to obscure: the relationship between inner certainty and the quality of giving. Most people who study the law of receiving approach it from the direction of wanting to receive. They want to know how to open the channel so that what they desire can arrive. They think of giving as a means to that end. Give in order to receive. But the mother does not give in order to receive. She gives from the natural overflow of a state that is already one of sufficiency. And the receiving that follows is not the goal she was aiming at. It is the inevitable consequence of the state she is in. Wattles' system, correctly understood, follows the same sequence. You do not cultivate the receiving state in order to receive. You cultivate it because it is the accurate inner response to the reality of infinite supply. The receiving that follows is not a reward for correct thinking. It is a mechanical consequence of the mind's alignment with the nature of the formless. This distinction matters enormously for the practice because it determines the quality of the inner state that is cultivated. A person who cultivates gratitude as a means of attracting supply is still, at the deepest level, operating from a posture of need. The gratitude is instrumental. It is in the service of an ulterior objective that has not yet been achieved. And this instrumental quality, however subtle, introduces a note of conditionality into the very state that is supposed to be unconditional. It is the difference between a mother who is kind to her child because she expects something in return, and a mother who is kind because kindness is the natural expression of how she sees the child in the world. The first is performing a calculation. The second is expressing a nature. Wattles' prescription for gratitude is the second kind, not a technique deployed in pursuit of an outcome, but the genuine structural recognition of existing good that naturally produces the inner orientation of the receiving state. The maternal model also illuminates the question of effort in a way that pure philosophy tends to make unnecessarily abstract. People frequently misread the law of receiving as an argument against sustained work, as though the receiving state were a state of passive waiting. The mother who receives without grasping is not passive. She is, in many cases, among the most consistently active people in a family's life, feeding, organizing, tending, solving, creating, maintaining. But the quality of her effort is different from the quality of striving effort. She does not work from a state of urgency about outcomes. She works because the work is what the present moment requires. Each action is performed completely, without the characteristic anxiety of someone who is uncertain whether the effort will produce the needed result. This is not indifference to results. It is something more sophisticated, a form of commitment to the present action that is possible only in a mind that is not simultaneously occupied with the question of whether the result will come. Because the result, the sufficiency of supply, is already resolved at the level of inner architecture, the action can be wholly itself, complete in the present moment, unmarked by the distorting pressure of urgency. The link between the mother's unconditional giving and the precise mechanics of Wattles' system becomes most visible when we examine what Wattles calls the impression of increase, the subject of chapter 14. He argues there that every person who comes into contact with the genuine creative mind should receive from that contact the distinct impression that their own life is advancing, that something of value is being added. The creative mind, operating from the receiving state, communicates sufficiency to those around it, not through words or performances of abundance, but through the quality of presence that proceeds from an inner state that has genuinely resolved the question of supply. A mother who gives unconditionally communicates exactly this impression. Those in her presence receive, through some quality they may not be able to name, the impression that the supply of love and care is not finite, that there is enough and more than enough, that the world, at least in her vicinity, is not a place of scarcity to be defended against. This impression is not a technique. It is the natural emanation of the inner state, and it is, in Wattles' system, one of the primary mechanisms by which the creative mind draws more of the formless supply into organized form, by expressing the reality of infinite supply so consistently and completely that every encounter with it functions as a demonstration of the law. The mother who receives everything she needs without grasping is, in the final analysis, not a special case of fortunate psychology. She is a precise demonstration of the law of receiving in a domain, the giving and sustaining of life, where the conditions for its operation appear with particular clarity. Her inner state is not mysterious. It is not beyond analysis. Wattles gives us the language to describe it exactly: a mind continuously fixed upon the best, held in structural gratitude for existing good, certain of sufficient supply, and therefore naturally open, both in giving and in receiving, in the precise way that the formless requires in order to move. She is, without knowing the terminology, a creative center aligned with the nature of the formless substance. She practices instinctively and continuously the inner discipline that Wattles spent years trying to render into scientific language. What he produced is not a refinement of what she already knew. It is a translation of it, a rendering of the ancient instinctive knowledge of sufficiency into the language of law, so that those who did not receive it instinctively might access it deliberately. The practical significance of using the maternal model as the primary demonstration of this law is not merely pedagogical, it is diagnostic. When you study the quality of that inner state, its certainty, its absence of urgency, its structural openness, and then compare it to the quality of your own inner state as you pursue what you want, the distance between the two becomes measurable, not emotionally measurable, in the way that comparisons of personal worth tend to be, but operationally measurable. You can ask, does my inner state carry the signature of one who already knows the supply is sufficient, or does it carry the signature of one who is not yet certain? The honest answer to that question is more useful than any strategy, because it identifies the actual variable, the inner architecture, that determines the result. The mother did not have a better strategy than you. She had a different inner state, and Wattles' system is, from beginning to end, a set of instructions for how to arrive at that state through deliberate practice rather than fortunate nature. In our examination of Emmett Fox's method of scientific prayer, we identified that the third stage, the stage Fox calls realization, requires the practitioner to do something that most people find genuinely difficult: to construct within the present moment of consciousness the actual inner experience of the condition prayed for as though it were already a present fact, not imagined as future, not hoped for as a possibility, experienced as a present reality, with the specific quality of inner certainty that accompanies direct knowledge rather than anticipation. Fox is precise about this requirement. The prayer does not operate from the level of wanting or hoping, but from the level of knowing. Knowing in the way that the body knows it is warm, in the way that the mind knows 2 and 2 are 4. The realization stage is the point at which the practitioner's inner state actually becomes the state of one who has rather than one who wants. This is the condition Fox identifies as the operative heart of scientific prayer. When we place that description alongside Wattles' description of the receiving state in Chapter 7, a correspondence became visible that is not coincidental. The inner state of one whose grateful mind is constantly fixed upon the best, the state that tends to become the best and will receive the best, is structurally identical to Fox's realization. Both describe a present tense inner orientation that has resolved the question of supply at the level of foundational certainty rather than future hope. Both identify this inner orientation as the actual operative condition that causes the formless, or in Fox's language, infinite mind, to move. Both insist that this condition is not a feeling to be summoned once and released, but a sustained inner state to be maintained as the background of all thought and action. The terminology differs. The law is the same. This convergence is significant because it demonstrates that the law of receiving is not a personal formulation of Wattles, but a principle arrived at independently by two rigorous thinkers operating from different methodological starting points. Fox approaches the question from the perspective of prayer as a discipline of consciousness, drawing on Christian mystical tradition and practical psychological observation. Wattles approaches it from the perspective of a quasi-scientific system grounded in the principles of New Thought philosophy and the monistic metaphysics of Hegel, Spinoza, and Emerson. They use different languages, address different audiences, and frame the law in different conceptual structures. And yet, they arrive at the same inner requirement. The practitioner must inhabit, in the present tense, the inner state of one who already has, not as a future projection, not as a desire, as a present tense fact of inner experience. The law of receiving, in this light, is not a law discovered by either Fox or Wattles. It is a law identified by both, and the convergence of their formulations from different angles strengthens the case that what we are examining is not a philosophy of persuasion, but an actual operative principle, one that functions independently of the conceptual framework used to describe it, the way gravity functions independently of whether it is described in Newtonian or relativistic terms. What changes between the frameworks is the precision and completeness of the description. What does not change is the law itself. Our previous examination of Wattles' teaching on the formless substance established that this substance is not passive material waiting to be shaped by the thoughts of those who know the technique. It is, in Wattles' precise language, intelligent. It is alive. It is always impelled toward more life. It moves by its own nature in the direction of greater expression, greater form, greater abundance. This means that the person who enters the receiving state is not inserting their intention into an inert medium. They are aligning themselves with a principle that is already and always moving in the direction of more. The receiving state is not the cause of abundance. It is the alignment of the human mind with a process of abundance that is already in motion at the level of formless substance. Wattles writes, "The universe desires you to have everything you want to have. Nature is friendly to your plans." These are not encouragements. They are descriptions of the actual nature of the formless, a nature that is constitutively oriented toward the increase of life. The receiving state is the condition of not placing yourself in opposition to that orientation. What does it mean to place yourself in opposition to it? In our earlier examination of the competitive mind, we identified the mechanism. The inner state of scarcity and urgency impresses the image of limitation upon the formless, and the formless mirrors that image back. But there is a more precise way to describe the opposition, one that brings the Fox and Wattles formulations into direct alignment. When the mind operates from a premise of future lack, when its dominant inner tone is the tone of one who does not yet have what is needed, it is, in Fox's language, failing to reach realization. It is praying from the level of need rather than from the level of knowing. And both Fox and Wattles agree that this failure is not a moral failure, but a technical one. The practitioner is using the wrong inner state as the operating condition. They are attempting to move the formless from a position of separation from it, when the formless can only be moved from a position of alignment with it. The alignment is the receiving state. The separation is the getting state. And the difference between them is not a matter of intention, but of actual inner architecture, of the fundamental tone of certainty or urgency, fullness or lack, that governs the mind's moment-to-moment experience. The meeting point of Fox and Wattles around the law of receiving also clarifies something that students of either thinker often find puzzling: the relationship between faith and evidence. Both thinkers insist that the receiving state, whether called realization or the grateful mind fixed upon the best, must be maintained independently of the evidence available in the visible world. Fox is explicit that the evidence of the visible world is, in the domain of spiritual law, irrelevant to the operation of the prayer. Wattles is equally explicit. To think truth, regardless of appearances, is laborious and requires the expenditure of more power than any other work. Both are describing the same discipline: the maintenance of an inner state whose authority derives not from the current state of visible circumstances, but from the known nature of the formless. This is not the instruction to ignore reality. It is the instruction to identify which level of reality is operatively authoritative for the purpose of the law. The visible world is the effect. The inner state is the cause, and you cannot change the effect by arguing with it from within it. You change the effect by changing the cause, by shifting the inner state to the one that produces a different impression upon the formless. What distinguishes the law of receiving as a meeting point of these two systems is that it names, with unusual precision, the exact inner state required, and it names it in terms that are practical enough to be reproduced without years of philosophical training. That state is gratitude, not gratitude as a feeling of warmth, not gratitude as an expression of religious sentiment, but gratitude as the specific inner orientation of a mind that is continuously fixed upon the existing good it can recognize as present fact. This is accessible to anyone at any moment of any day. It requires no special knowledge, no initiatory experience, no unusual talent. It requires only the deliberate act of directing attention toward what is good in the present moment, sustaining that direction with sufficient consistency to allow it to become the dominant tone of consciousness, and then releasing thought and action from within that dominant tone. Fox calls the result of this practice realization. Wattles calls it the receiving state. Both are describing the same inner condition, the condition in which the channel between the human mind and the formless substance is open, maintained, and operative. The channel metaphor, which Wattles uses throughout the text, now acquires its full technical meaning. A channel does not create the flow that passes through it. It provides the path of least resistance for a flow that already exists. The supply of formless substance is already in motion toward life and abundance. The gratitude-governed mind is the channel that provides the path of least resistance for that motion. The competitive, grasping, urgency-driven mind is a channel that has been obstructed, not by external forces, but by the inner architecture of the mind itself. The obstruction is not permanent. It is maintained by continued habitation of the wrong inner state. The moment the inner state shifts, The moment the mind returns to genuine orientation toward the best, toward recognized existing good, toward the certainty of sufficient supply, the obstruction releases and the flow resumes. This is the law. It is the same law that Fox identifies at the center of scientific prayer, and Wattles identifies at the center of the science of getting rich. It is the law of receiving seen from two angles, described in two languages, producing one operational understanding. The inner state is the only variable that matters. The practical consequence of understanding this convergence is that the practitioner now has access to two independent methodological traditions, both of which point to the same technique with the same precision. When Fox's language of realization resonates more directly with your particular mind, you can approach the receiving state through that door. When Wattles's language of grateful fixation upon the best speaks more clearly to your experience, you can enter through that door. The underlying room is the same. What you are cultivating by either path is the precise inner condition in which the human mind is genuinely, structurally, continuously aligned with the creative intelligence of the formless. Not as an aspiration, not as an occasional achievement, but as the governing tone of consciousness from which thought and action perpetually proceed. That is the receiving state. That is the law. That is what the mother demonstrated in her kitchen, before either Fox or Wattles had found the words for it. Wattles identifies with clinical precision the mechanism by which the act of pursuit, when conducted from the inner state of felt lack, closes the very channel it is intended to open. This mechanism is not a side observation in the text. It is the central diagnosis from which the entire prescription of the system proceeds. Without understanding exactly how closure occurs, the instruction to maintain the receiving state remains an abstract directive without an actionable foundation. The closure mechanism works as follows. The mind that pursues wealth from a state of urgency, anxiety, or felt deficiency is, in the act of pursuing, impressing upon the formless substance the image that governs its inner state, the image of a mind that does not yet have what it needs. Wattles is explicit about the mechanics in Chapter 4. Thinking substance takes the form of its thought. If the dominant thought governing the pursuit is the thought of absence, the thought of what has not yet arrived, of what is insufficient, of what is urgently required, then the formless takes the form of that thought. It produces and sustains the condition of absence. The pursuit, rather than moving the formless toward supply, moves it toward the sustained impression of need. The channel is not merely not opened, it is actively closed by the very act of pursuit. This is the diagnosis that most industrious people are not prepared to receive, because it appears to contradict the visible evidence of their lives. They work and they produce results. They pursue and they achieve things. The system does not deny this. It explains it by noting that the results produced by competitive effort are always less than and structurally different in character from the results that would flow through an open channel. A partially obstructed channel can still transmit some flow. The person who pursues from a state of partial urgency and partial certainty will receive partial supply, enough to survive, enough to sustain the belief that the method is working, but never the full, consistent, effortless sufficiency that characterizes the receiving mind. The obstruction is not total, but neither does it allow the law to operate at its full capacity. And the gap between what the person receives and what a fully open channel would transmit is the measure of the obstruction, the measure of the degree to which the inner state carries the signature of urgency and lack, rather than certainty and sufficiency. What makes the obstruction particularly difficult to recognize from within is that the emotional experience of pursuing from urgency feels like commitment. It presents itself to the pursuing mind as evidence of seriousness, as proof that the objective genuinely matters and is being genuinely sought. The tightening of the inner state under pressure does not feel like obstruction. It feels like effort, and effort, in the value system of the competitive plane, is the primary virtue. The more one strains, the more one appears to be doing everything possible. But in Wattles' system, this experience of virtuous effort is precisely the experience of closing the channel. The tightening that feels like commitment is at the level of the impression made upon the formless, the image of a mind that does not yet have what it needs. And the formless responds to that image, as it always does, without judgment or variation, by continuing to produce the condition of not yet having. The effort is real. The sincerity is real. The obstruction is also real, and it operates independently of both. Consider what happens specifically when urgency enters the inner state. Urgency is the experience of a mind that believes the required result must arrive within a defined time frame, and that the failure to arrive will constitute a loss that cannot be recovered. This belief that the supply is time-limited, that a window will close, that the opportunity is singular and irreplaceable, is, from the perspective of the law of receiving, the most precise possible formulation of the scarcity premise. It is the competitive mind at its most acute, and it produces a corresponding intensity of closure in the channel. Wattles does not describe urgency as an obstacle to be managed or worked around. He describes it as the signal of a mind that has departed entirely from the creative plane, a mind that has reverted completely to the competitive premise, and in doing so has temporarily, entirely suspended its power to cause creation. The word temporarily is important. The closure is not permanent, but it is total while it persists. And urgency, once established as the dominant tone of consciousness, persists with considerable tenacity, because it is continuously fed by the very experiences of insufficient supply that it itself produces. There is a further dimension of the closure mechanism that Wattles addresses in his discussion of what he calls thinking in a certain way, the condition he identifies in Chapter 8 as the essential inner requirement of the system. He writes that the practitioner must hold a clear mental image of what is desired and must hold it with the purpose to acquire it. The word purpose here is important, and it must be distinguished from urgency. Purpose, in Wattles' language, is the calm, clear, unwavering orientation of the mind toward a specific form it intends to create. It is directional without being contracted. It carries no anxiety about whether the creation will occur, because the certainty that it will occur is built into the foundational premise of the receiving state. Urgency is the corruption of purpose by the scarcity premise, the insertion of doubt and time pressure into what would otherwise be a clean, creative orientation. Purpose opens the channel. Urgency closes it. They are not different degrees of the same thing. They are structurally opposite inner states. And the practitioner who cannot feel the difference between them in their own experience has not yet developed sufficient inner sensitivity to operate the system correctly. The most important practical implication of the closure mechanism is this: the reason for maintaining the receiving state is not primarily to feel better or to approach life with a more pleasant inner tone. The reason is mechanical. The receiving state is the only inner state from which the creative process can operate at full capacity. Every deviation from it, every moment of urgency, every descent into the felt experience of insufficiency, every contraction around the fear of not enough, is a moment in which the channel is partially or fully closed and the movement of supply through it is partially or fully interrupted. The practice of maintaining the receiving state is therefore not a spiritual luxury or an aspirational ideal. It is the maintenance of the operational condition of the system. To neglect it is not merely to operate at reduced efficiency. It is to operate from within the law in a direction that reverses the desired effect, to use the same precision of the formless that is supposed to produce supply as the instrument for producing its continued absence. The productive response to this diagnosis is not guilt about past states of urgency. Wattles is not concerned with the emotional implications of the diagnosis. He is concerned with its operational ones. The past states of urgency that have produced past experiences of insufficient supply are relevant only insofar as they illuminate the mechanism. Once the mechanism is understood, the relevant question becomes entirely forward-looking. What inner state am I currently in, and what impression is it currently making upon the formless? That is the only actionable question. And Wattles' system provides a precise answer. If you are in the receiving state, if your mind is genuinely fixed upon the best, sustained by continuous gratitude, free from urgency and the scarcity premise, the channel is open and supply is moving. If you are not, if the inner state carries the signature of urgency, anxiety, or felt insufficiency, the channel is closed to the degree that those qualities govern the inner state. This is the diagnosis. The prescription follows from it directly. The exhaustion pattern that Wattles' system diagnoses is not a rare phenomenon. It is, by observation, the dominant experience of most people who are genuinely committed to improving their material circumstances. They work hard, and they work consistently. They apply intelligence and discipline to their effort. They produce results that are real and measurable. And yet, with a persistence that eventually becomes its own kind of torment, the results remain insufficient, not dramatically insufficient, not in a way that clearly signals failure, but consistently just below the threshold of the ease and sufficiency they are working toward. The gap is the signature of the pattern. The effort is real. The results are real. But between them, something's absorbing most of what the effort should produce. And the absorbing agent is invisible because it operates at the level of the inner state rather than at the level of action. The pattern, once the mechanism is clear, traces itself with grim precision. The person encounters the gap between effort and result. The natural interpretation of this gap, within the logic of the competitive plane, is that more effort is required. The person increases the effort. The effort increases the urgency. because the gap has demonstrated that the previous level of effort was insufficient, and the stakes of that insufficiency are now more visible than before. The urgency intensifies the impression of lack made upon the formless. The formless mirrors that impression back as continued insufficiency. The gap narrows insufficiently or expands further. The person interprets this as evidence of the need for still more effort, still greater urgency, still deeper commitment. The cycle tightens. Each iteration reinforces the next. The channel closes progressively. The effort increases. The supply decreases. The gap widens. And the person who is genuinely working as hard as they know how to work cannot understand why the relationship between effort and result seems to be inverted. Wattles identifies the exit from this pattern with characteristic precision. It is a single inner movement, and it cannot be forced. He writes in Chapter 5, "You must get rid of the thought of competition. You are to create, not to compete for what is already created." The exit from the exhaustion pattern is not a reduction of effort. It is a replacement of the inner premise from which effort proceeds. The person who exits the pattern does not work less. They work differently, from a different inner state, from the premise of infinite creative supply, rather than the premise of finite competitive supply. This inner shift produces immediately and mechanically a different impression upon the formless, and the formless responds to the new impression by adjusting the movement of supply in the corresponding direction. The outer action may change very little. The inner architecture changes completely. And because the inner architecture is the operative variable, the results change in proportion to the completeness of the shift. Why can the shift not be forced? Because forcing is itself an act of the competitive mind. The person who says, "I will force myself to believe in infinite supply. I will compel myself to stop feeling urgent. I will make myself feel grateful," is applying the competitive method, the method of willful striving, to the project of exiting the competitive method. The attempt is self-defeating. The shift cannot be achieved by direct assault on the inner state. It can only be cultivated by creating, through consistent practice, the conditions from which the correct inner state arises naturally. This is why Wattles prescribes gratitude not as an act of will, but as a practice of attention, the deliberate, consistent direction of attention toward recognized existing good. You do not force yourself into gratitude. You make a habit of looking at what is already good, and gratitude arises from that looking. The receiving state follows gratitude. You cannot impose it. You can only prepare the ground from which it grows. The exhaustion pattern is particularly insidious because it tends to generate its own justification. The person in the pattern has evidence, real experiential evidence, that their situation is one of insufficiency. They have worked hard, and the supply remains uncertain. They have given significant effort, and the gap has not closed as expected. These are not imagined experiences. They are real ones. And the natural response to real experiences of insufficiency is to hold them as accurate reports on the state of the world, as evidence that the supply genuinely is limited and that more competitive effort genuinely is required. This natural response is the precise act that locks the pattern in place. Because in holding the experiences of insufficiency as authoritative evidence about reality, The person is impressing the image of insufficiency upon the formless with renewed conviction, with the force of empirical certainty behind it, and the formless responds accordingly. The evidence becomes self-fulfilling. The pattern becomes self-sealing. The only move that breaks the seal is the one Wattles identifies in Chapter 4, to think truth regardless of appearances. This is not the instruction to pretend that the experiences of insufficiency did not occur. It is the instruction to identify which level of reality has operative authority in the system you are working with. The experiences of insufficiency belong to the world of visible forms, the world of effects. The truth that Wattles asks the practitioner to hold is the truth about causes, that the supply of formless substance is unlimited, that it moves in response to inner state, and that the experiences of insufficiency are the effects of a previous inner state that can be changed. Holding this truth in the face of the experiential evidence of insufficiency is, as Wattles acknowledges, the hardest work available to the human mind. But it is the only work that actually changes the cause. Every other response to the evidence of insufficiency, including working harder from within the same inner state, changes only the appearance of the response. The cause remains. The pattern continues. There is a particular quality that distinguishes the person who has genuinely crossed from the exhaustion pattern to the receiving state. And it is not a quality of reduced effort or relaxed ambition. It is a quality of presence. The person who has made the crossing acts completely in the present action, not because they have abandoned concern for future results, but because their concern for future results has been resolved at the level of inner architecture. The supply question is settled. The formless is known to be moving. The present action is therefore free to be completely itself, free from the distorting pressure of urgency, free from the measuring of itself against an expected return, free from the anxious anticipation of the next step before the current one is complete. Wattles describes this quality in Chapter 11 as the mark of the person who is acting in the certain way. It is not a quality of indifference. It is a quality of a specific kind of certainty, the certainty of a mind that has genuinely made the inner shift from the competitive to the creative plane and is now working from within the law rather than against it. The exit from the exhaustion pattern is not a single event. It is a practice. Specifically, the practice of returning to the receiving state each time the inner state drops from it. Wattles does not suggest that the practitioner will maintain the receiving state continuously and without interruption from the moment they understand its mechanics. He suggests, through the precision of his prescription for gratitude as a continuous orientation, that the practice consists precisely in the repeated return, in the cultivation of a habit of attention that consistently restores the inner state to its correct foundation whenever the pressures of experience and appearance have temporarily displaced it. The exit from the pattern is a direction of travel, not a destination arrived at once. And the instrument that makes that direction of travel possible, the instrument that provides the means of return whenever the channel begins to close, is, as always, the same. The deliberate, specific, unromantic recognition of existing good, not as a technique, not as a performance, as the factual acknowledgement of what is already present and real, held with sufficient consistency to become the dominant tone of consciousness. That is the door out of the exhaustion pattern. Wattles has identified it with precision. It remains open regardless of how long you have been in the pattern or how tightly the cycle has closed. Wattles prescribes gratitude not as a morning ritual or a journaling practice or a discipline attached to a particular time of day. He prescribes it as a continuous orientation of consciousness, a fundamental shift in the default direction of mental attention from what is absent to what is present, from what has not yet arrived to what already exists and is already good. This prescription is easy to summarize and genuinely difficult to execute because the default direction of the untrained human mind is not orientation toward existing good. The untrained mind tends, by the natural weight of unexamined experience, toward the assessment of gaps. What is not yet sufficient? What has not yet arrived? What is still required? This gap assessment is not malice or pessimism. It is the natural function of a survival-oriented intelligence that has been shaped by evolutionary pressures to attend to deficiencies rather than sufficiencies. Wattles is asking the practitioner to override that default with a deliberate counter-habit, a counter-habit so thoroughly established that it eventually becomes the new default, the new resting state of the mind, the background frequency from which all thought and action proceeds. The practice begins with what might be called the inventory of existing good, not an inventory of hopes or visions or desired future states. Those belong to a different stage of the practice. The inventory of existing good is an accounting of what is already present, already real, already functioning in the practitioner's life. The body that is breathing, the mind that is thinking, the relationships, however imperfect, that provide the basic conditions of human life, the skills and capacities that are already operative, the small, reliable mercies of a day, food, warmth, the functioning of the senses, the existence of beauty in the visible world. Wattles writes, "It is necessary, then, to cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you and to give thanks continuously. And because all things have contributed to your advancement, you should include all things in your gratitude. The scope of the acknowledgement is not selective. It is comprehensive. Everything that sustains life and enables function is included in the recognition. Not because this represents positive thinking as a mood management strategy, but because every acknowledgement of existing good is a specific act of fixing the mind upon what is real and present in the domain of sufficiency. And each such act is an impression made upon the formless in the direction of more of the same. The morning is identified by Wattles as the critical period for establishing the dominant tone from which the day proceeds. The logic is mechanical. The first strong impression of consciousness tends to become the governing frequency of the mind for the period that follows, in the way that the first note played in a room sets the resonance against which subsequent sounds are experienced. If the first movement of consciousness in the morning is toward the problems of the day, the pressures, the deficiencies, the uncertainties, then the governing frequency of the mind for the morning is set in the direction of lack. Every subsequent experience of the day is filtered through that frequency, and the formless, which is responding continuously to the dominant impression, is receiving a continuous signal in the direction of insufficiency. If the first movement of consciousness is instead the deliberate, specific recognition of existing good, held with enough care and precision that it actually produces the feeling of genuine appreciation rather than the performance of it, then the governing frequency is set in the direction of sufficiency, and the day proceeds from within a fundamentally different relationship with the formless. This is not a prescription for ignoring the problems of the day. Wattles is not asking the practitioner to pretend that difficulties do not exist or that challenges are not real. He is asking the practitioner to govern the sequence of attention, to establish the foundation of recognized existing good before turning attention to what requires action or resolution. This sequence matters because the inner state from which you approach a problem determines the quality of the solution you can access. A mind that approaches its problems from within a state of recognized sufficiency approaches them as a creator, one whose fundamental relationship with the formless is already established, already aligned, and from within which creative solutions can be impressed upon the substance and produced. A mind that approaches its problems from within a state of urgency and lack approaches them as a competitor, one whose fundamental relationship with the formless is already contracted, already closed, and from within which only the methods of the competitive plane are available. Same problem, different inner states, structurally different quality of solution. The transition from the morning recognition of existing good to the forward-facing orientation of desire and intention is also described by Wattles with precision. The grateful mind, having established its orientation toward existing good, moves naturally into what he calls the lively expectation of increase. This expectation is not wishful thinking. It is the natural consequence of a mind that genuinely recognizes the existing good in its life and understands, through the correct comprehension of the system, that the same formless substance that produced all existing good is already in motion toward more. The expectation is not an act of will directed at an uncertain future. It is the forward extension of a present certainty. If the formless has already produced this good, and if it is constitutively oriented toward more life and more abundance, then more is already in motion. The expectation is simply the recognition of that motion. This is what Wattles means by faith born of gratitude, not a hope that more will come, but the certainty that it already is coming, derived from the genuine recognition of what has already come. The specific quality of the gratitude Wattles prescribes must be examined carefully because it is frequently misread. He does not prescribe gratitude for imagined goods, for things not yet received, for outcomes not yet manifest. He prescribes gratitude for existing goods, for what is already present and real. This distinction is critical. Gratitude for imagined future goods held in the absence of corresponding present tense recognition of what already exists is a form of wishful forward projection that does not carry the specific inner quality of the receiving state. It is the expression of a mind that is still at its core oriented toward the future, still in the mode of hoping rather than knowing. The receiving state is not a future orientation. It is a present one. It is the inner condition of one who, in the present moment, genuinely recognizes and deeply acknowledges the existing good that surrounds them, and from that foundation of present recognition holds the forward expectation with the quality of certainty rather than hope. The sequence is always present to future, not future back. You begin with what is, you end with what is coming. You never begin with what is coming. The practical challenge of maintaining this orientation as a continuous background frequency is considerable, and Wattles acknowledges it by prescribing the habit explicitly, not the act, but the habit. A habit is not something you do once when you remember it. It is a default pattern of response that has been so thoroughly established by repetition that it operates without deliberate activation. The habit of gratitude in Wattles's prescription is the progressive establishment of the recognition of existing good as the default resting state of consciousness, the orientation the mind naturally returns to whenever it is not otherwise directed. This does not happen in a day or a week. It happens through the sustained, repetitive practice of deliberately directing attention toward existing good until that direction becomes the mind's natural gravity. The early stages of this practice require effort. The effort of noticing when attention has drifted toward the assessment of gaps and deliberately redirecting it toward the recognition of existing good. With sufficient repetition, the effort required for the redirection diminishes. With further repetition, the redirection begins to happen automatically. The habit is established when the mind's natural tendency, its default resting state, is orientation toward existing good rather than orientation toward deficiency. Wattles provides a specific instruction about where not to direct mental energy that is, in the context of the daily practice of gratitude, equally important to the instruction about where to direct it. He writes, "Do not waste time thinking or talking about the shortcomings or wrong actions of plutocrats or trust magnates. Do not rage against corrupt politicians." In the context of the receiving state, these instructions are not ethical in nature. They are mechanical. Every thought devoted to the wrong actions of others, every moment of resentment, indignation, or fixation on the systems and people that appear to limit supply, is a moment in which the mind is fixed upon limitation rather than upon the best. It is a moment in which the impression made upon the formless is of a mind that is surrounded by obstruction, constraint, and the wrongness of its circumstances, and the formless responds to that impression with fidelity. Wattles is not asking the practitioner to be politically passive or morally indifferent. He is pointing out, with mechanical precision, that the mental energy spent on resentment and indignation is the same mental energy that belongs, in the receiving state, to the recognition of existing good and the certainty of infinite supply. It cannot be in two places at once. Where attention goes, the impression follows. Where the impression goes, the formless follows. The final element of the daily practice of gratitude that Wattles identifies is the quality of deliberateness he attaches to the forward vision, the mental form of the desired result that is held as a complement to the recognition of existing good. He describes this in Chapter 8 as thinking in a certain way, the practice of forming a clear, specific, definite mental image of the thing desired and holding that image with the purpose to bring it into visible manifestation. This image is not held with hope or longing. It is held with the same quality of present tense certainty that governs the recognition of existing good. You hold the mental form of the desired result as already real at the level of the formless, already impressed, already in the process of taking form, the way you hold a fact that you know to be true. not because the visible evidence confirms it, but because the law confirms it. You have made the impression. The formless is responding. The form is in process. The receiving mind holds this not as a wish, but as a recognition. And in holding it as a recognition, it maintains the precise inner state, open, certain, free from urgency, from which the law can complete its operation without interference. The receiving state test that Wattles' system implies, and that becomes explicit when the mechanics of Chapter 7 are held alongside the diagnostic framework of the entire text, is a real-time instrument, not a retrospective evaluation. It does not ask whether your past actions have been correct or whether your past states have been productive. It asks only this: what is the quality of my inner state in this present moment? Is the dominant tone of my consciousness the tone of one who already knows the supply is sufficient, or is it the tone of one who is not yet certain? This question, asked with honesty and without the defensive instinct to perform the correct answer, provides more operational information about the state of your channel than any review of results, any assessment of strategy, or any examination of the effort being applied. The signs of the receiving state are not difficult to recognize when you have the description in front of you. They are a quality of inner ease that is not relaxation, but the ease of a mind that has resolved the supply question at its foundation. The ability to perform the present action completely without being pulled out of it by anxiety about what the action will produce or what must be done next. The absence of urgency about outcomes, not indifference to results, but the specific quality of non-urgency that belongs to a mind that knows the results are already in motion. The natural orientation of attention toward what is good in the present circumstances, even when those circumstances contain difficulty, and perhaps most diagnostically, the ability to encounter a gap between expectation and result without contracting, without the tightening that is the signature of a mind that has just received confirmation of the scarcity premise. A mind in the receiving state encounters the gap and remains in the creative posture, because the gap does not disturb its fundamental certainty about the nature of the supply. The signs of the getting state are equally specific, and they tend to be more immediately recognizable because they are physically felt. The tightening in the chest or solar plexus that accompanies urgency, the restless measuring of actions against expected results, the inability to complete a present action without simultaneously evaluating whether it is producing the required return. The specific resentment that arises when results do not match effort, a resentment that is always at its root, the emotion of a mind that believes effort and reward are related through a mechanism of fairness, which is the competitive premise in its emotional form. The sense, always low frequency but always present, that the supply is uncertain and must be actively secured before someone or something takes it. These are not character flaws. They are the experiential signatures of a particular inner state, the state of the competitive plane, the state of getting rather than receiving, and they are both the symptoms and the cause of the pattern in which effort produces less than it should. The practice that Wattles prescribes as the response to the recognition of the getting state is precise. Not effort to move directly from urgency to certainty, but return, the deliberate return to the recognition of existing good. Not a dramatic internal intervention, but a specific act of attention, to take whatever is genuinely good in the present moment, however small, and to fix the mind upon it with deliberate care, to notice the functioning of the breath, to acknowledge the capacity for thought, to recognize whatever real supply exists in the present circumstances, and to hold that recognition long enough for it to actually register as a fact rather than merely as a statement. This act of return does not instantly restore the full receiving state, but it interrupts the closing mechanism. It redirects the impression being made upon the formless, and repeated consistently, return to each time the state drops, however many times that is in a given day. It progressively establishes the receiving state as the new dominant tone of consciousness. The test and the return together constitute the entire practical discipline of the law of receiving, as Wattles formulates it. They require no special circumstances, no retreat from engagement with the world, no extraordinary conditions of quiet or solitude. They can be practiced in the middle of difficulty, in the midst of a working day, in the presence of results that have not yet arrived. The test is always available. The return is always available. The formless is always available. The channel is always capable of being opened or maintained. And the law operates, without exception and without modification, in the direction of the dominant inner impression held by the practitioner. This is not a promise of comfort. It is a statement of mechanical precision. The law is not personal. It does not favor or penalize. It simply responds to the impression that is actually currently dominantly present in the mind that is operating within its field. That mind is yours. The impression is yours to govern. The receiving state is yours to cultivate. The law does the rest. The law of receiving, held in its complete technical form, is the most exacting teaching in Wattles' system, because it requires the practitioner to understand that the variable which governs all results is not any outer factor, but a single inner condition, the quality of the dominant impression held in the mind as it engages with the formless substance. Every other element of the system, the clear mental image, the definite purpose, the efficient action, the advancing posture, depends upon this condition for its operation. Without the receiving state as the foundational inner architecture from which these elements proceed, they are techniques without a mechanism. They may produce results at the level of the competitive plane. They cannot produce results at the level of the creative plane because the creative plane requires, as its first and non-negotiable condition, the inner state of a mind that is genuinely, structurally, continuously in alignment with the nature of the formless, open, grateful, certain, and free from the contracting pressure of urgency and scarcity. That alignment is what the law of receiving describes. It is not a supplement to the system. It is its operating foundation. The woman at the beginning of this examination, the one who received without grasping, who gave without calculating, who worked without urgency, was not the beneficiary of good fortune or unusual psychology. She was the demonstration of a law. She had arrived, through whatever combination of circumstance, temperament, and life experience, at the inner architecture that Wattles describes as the receiving state. Her foundational premise, at the level below conscious thought, at the level where the actual impression upon the formless is made, was the premise of sufficient supply. She did not hold this premise because she had read a chapter on gratitude. She held it because her life had produced it in her, or because something in her nature had always inclined toward it, but the law operates identically regardless of how the receiving state was arrived at. Whether it came instinctively through temperament or deliberately through practice, the channel it opens is the same channel. The formless responds to the impression, not to the method by which the impression was established. What Wattles gives the practitioner who did not arrive at the receiving state naturally, who was not the person in the room who seemed to receive easily, who has been working hard and well and finding the supply consistently uncertain, is the precise description of the mechanism by which the receiving state can be cultivated deliberately. The instrument is gratitude. The practice is the continuous, specific, unromantic recognition of existing good. The discipline is the governance of attention, the habit of returning the mind each time it drifts toward the assessment of gaps to the recognition of what is already present and real. The measure of success is not the feeling of certainty. It is the progressive reduction of the urgency and contraction that characterize the getting state, and the progressive establishment of the ease and openness that characterize the receiving state. This is the work. It is the most demanding work Wattles identifies, and it is the only work that actually changes the inner variable upon which all outer results depend. The synthesis of the law, held in its essential form, is this: sufficiency is not a result you arrive at by first securing it from the outside. It is an inner condition you establish first, through deliberate cultivation, and from which supply is then drawn through the open channel. The mother who gives from fullness does not give in order to become full. She gives from fullness, and that fullness is continuous because it is not being drawn from a finite reservoir. It is flowing from the alignment of her inner state with the nature of the formless, which is itself constitutively oriented toward more life, more abundance, and more expression. You do not earn your way into the receiving state by sufficient accumulation. You cultivate your way into it by sufficient practice. And the formless, which has been waiting, in the precise sense that a current waits for a channel, moves through the opened architecture with the same reliability that Wattles has been describing in the language of exact science throughout the entirety of the system. Wattles writes, in the final summary chapter of The Science of Getting Rich, with the compression of a man who has distilled decades of philosophical study into its essential principle, the whole process of mental adjustment and atonement can be summed up in one word: gratitude. Read this with the precision it deserves. He does not say that gratitude is one of the principles. He does not say that gratitude is the most important principle. He says it is the sum, the single word into which the entire process of mental adjustment and atonement, the entire architecture of the relationship between the human mind and the formless substance, can be compressed without remainder. This is a claim of the most exacting specificity, and it must be received with corresponding exactness. What is being said is that every other practice of the system, the clear image, the definite purpose, the efficient present action, the creative rather than competitive posture, is, when correctly understood, an expression of gratitude or a consequence of it. Gratitude is not one practice among several. It is the foundational inner state from which all other correct practice naturally proceeds. To receive this claim properly, it must be held alongside the full technical description of what gratitude means in Wattles' system. Not a feeling of warmth, not a devotional expression, not a positive emotion cultivated for its own sake. Gratitude in this system is the specific inner orientation of a mind continuously fixed upon the best, upon the highest existing good, the infinite supply of the formless, the reality of abundance as a present tense fact, rather than a future aspiration. It is the inner posture that corresponds precisely to the nature of the formless itself, which is, in Wattles' foundational principle, constitutively oriented toward more life, more expression, more abundance. The grateful mind is not aligned with the formless by a metaphysical courtesy. It is aligned with it by exact correspondence, the correspondence of two intelligences that share the same fundamental orientation toward the best, toward increase, toward the reality of sufficient supply. Live in the best that you can imagine. This instruction from Wattles is not a directive to inhabit a fantasy. It is the practical translation of the receiving state into the orientation of daily life. To live in the best that you can imagine is to inhabit as your operative present tense reality the condition of that sufficiency, to act from within it, to think from within it, to encounter each moment from within the inner architecture of one who already dwells in the highest good accessible to their conception. This is not delusion. Delusion is the attempt to replace reality with a preferred version of it. What Wattles is prescribing is the correct identification of what reality actually consists of at the level of the formless, which is abundant, infinite, and moving toward the increase of life, and the alignment of the inner state with that reality rather than with the appearances of the visible world, which are effects rather than causes. To live in the best is to inhabit the truth at the level where the law operates, regardless of the evidence available at the level where the effects are currently appearing. Work toward it. The instruction to work is equally important and equally precise. The receiving state is not passivity. It is not the abandonment of directed effort or the surrender of the human creative will. It is the correct inner state from which effort is applied. The state of one whose action is freed from urgency and anxiety precisely because the supply question has been resolved at the level of inner architecture. The person who works from within the receiving state brings to each action a quality of complete presence and exact purpose that the person working from urgency cannot replicate, because urgency always divides the mind, placing part of its attention in the present action and part in the anxious monitoring of results and contingencies. The receiving mind is whole in the present action. It is, in Wattles' language, advancing, impressing upon the formless, through the quality of its engagement with the present moment, the image of a mind that is moving toward the best with certainty and without contraction. Do not spend your time thinking or talking about the shortcomings or wrong acts of those in power. This instruction, which appears in Chapter 7 in the context of the practice of gratitude, carries its full weight when its mechanical logic is understood. The mind that is fixed upon the failures and wrongs of others is a mind that is fixed upon insufficiency, injustice, and the obstruction of supply. And the formless, which takes the form of the dominant impression held within it, will produce from that fixation precisely the experience of a world characterized by insufficiency, injustice, and obstructed supply. This is not an argument for complacency or for the endorsement of wrong. It is a mechanical observation about the operative cost of sustained attention upon what is wrong. The receiving mind does not deny wrong. It refuses to make wrong the dominant impression governing its creative output. It reserves that position for the best, for the reality of sufficient supply, for the highest good it can conceive, for the recognition of the formless, moving always in the direction of more life. Remain focused upon the vision of what you want. The vision is not a picture of an escape from the present. It is the mental form of the reality you are calling into existence through the operation of the law. You hold it not as a hope, but as a recognition. The recognition that what you are impressing upon the formless is already at the level of the creative plane in the process of taking form. The visible world will show its effects in the appointed sequence. Your part is not to compel that sequence by urgency or to monitor it with anxiety. Your part is to maintain the impression with the clarity, consistency, and certainty of a mind that knows the law and trusts its precision. Wattles calls this acting in the certain way. It is not a reference to a specific set of outer actions. It is a description of the quality of inner authority from which any outer action proceeds when the receiving state is genuinely operative. That authority is not assumed or performed. It is the natural expression of a mind that has genuinely aligned itself with the formless and genuinely understood what that alignment means. Gratitude will keep you connected to the best, and connection to the best is all that receiving requires. This sentence, held as the final formulation of the law, contains everything. The connection is not earned. It is maintained. It is maintained through the continuous, specific, unromantic, deliberately practiced act of recognizing what is already good in the present moment and holding that recognition long enough for it to become the governing impression upon the formless. This is the whole of the practice. This is the whole of the law. The woman you thought of at the beginning of this examination maintained that connection instinctively and continuously, and supply found her the way water finds an open vessel held beneath a flowing source. The law made no exception for her. It operated precisely as it always does. The invitation before you is not to admire the law from a distance, but to submit to it in the same completeness, to make the receiving state the architectural foundation of your inner life, and to watch with the patience of one who knows the outcome as the formless moves accordingly. Consider someone whose life has demonstrated this law to you, someone you have witnessed firsthand, not in a book or a philosophy, but in a life that was actually lived in your presence. Think carefully. Not someone who merely accumulated wealth or achieved visible success. Not someone who worked hard and was rewarded, but someone who appeared to operate from a fundamentally different inner state than the one that exhausts most people. Someone for whom supply arrived with a consistency and an ease that could not be explained entirely by the quality of their effort, and whose most visible inner quality was not ambition or discipline, but a particular quality of groundedness, a settled certainty about the sufficiency of their world that allowed them to give generously, to act completely, and to receive without grasping. When you find that person in your memory, examine what they had, not what they possessed materially, but what quality they carried in their engagement with the world. Was it urgency or was it ease? Was it the tightness of someone fighting for their portion, or the openness of someone who expected their portion to arrive? Was their giving measured and conditional, or was it the natural overflow of a state that did not require replenishment from outside itself? Whatever description forms in your mind as you answer those questions, that description is the law of receiving expressed in the specific vocabulary of a life you have directly observed. It is not philosophy, it is evidence. And Wattles' system asks you to hold that evidence alongside his formulation and recognize that what you are looking at in both places is the same thing. The description of what the inner state of alignment with the formless actually looks like when it inhabits a human life. Write that description in the comments below. Name the quality. Describe what that person had that most people do not. Because when you look closely at the description you produce, when you follow it carefully through the specifics of the person you're thinking of, you will find that every distinctive quality you name reduces, upon examination, to the same foundational inner state, the state of a mind continuously fixed upon the best, held in structural gratitude for existing good, certain of sufficient supply, and therefore, naturally, consistently, and without dramatic effort, in the receiving condition that Wallace Wattles spent a lifetime rendering into the language of exact science. If what you have encountered in this examination has clarified something that has long been imprecise in your understanding, if the distinction between getting and receiving now carries a mechanical weight it did not carry before, or if the description of the exhaustion pattern illuminated something in your own experience that you had previously attributed to effort or strategy or circumstance, then share this with someone who is working too hard for too little. Not as encouragement, not as motivation, as information, as the precise diagnosis of a mechanism that operates in their life with or without their awareness of it. The law does not wait for comprehension, but comprehension changes what is possible. Wattles wrote for those who wanted results and who were willing to take the conclusions of the science as a basis for action without waiting to understand every philosophical premise that preceded them. That is still the invitation. The law is operative. The channel is available. The only question remaining is the one that has always been the only question. What is the dominant impression you are currently making upon the formless? Answer that honestly. The rest follows with mathematical certainty.